trying to decide what's the best path to a tournament or match victory, you have to leave very often your emotions out of it, and very often the emotions will be that if I have a better position, I need to win, or if I think I'm superior to my opponent, then I need to win. But that's not always maybe the best way. Sometimes you might take undue risks, and in any individual game, of course, um, it's not like you have a guarantee of winning. There's a percentage that you'll win, there's a percentage that you'll lose, and every outcome is possible. But the difference between game 14 and normal tournament, the game 14 World Championship match and normal tournament is enormous. And even the difference between game 14 and game 1 is absolutely enormous, as we saw. Gukesh in game 1 was perhaps playing a bit carelessly, and he wouldn't have played that way in game 14. That's just how it is. And that's the correct approach, most likely. And in terms of Ding, I think he was trying to play it safe. I mean, if you look at his opening, it was, I mean, it wasn't like, let's say, a safe choice, but it was just a normal choice. Like he's playing something that he's not taking crazy risks. I would say if I give an example of a crazy risk in terms of the opening, it would be for example, with the white pieces, like to play a reversed King's Indian.
Well, just to
And
make
by
a
that,
comparison, maybe we can do the comparison with the final game between him and Nepo from their respective match.
yeah,
When he
there he was
went
actually taking, I
H4,
think,
he tried to go
unreasonable risks.
completely insane, right?
But those risks weren't decided on, I assume, before the game. I think it was just that during the game he became attracted to this idea of H4 knight G5 and so on, and it was just both objectively incorrect and also not really. I mean, it was too risky. It worked out for him because he didn't lose the game. He drew, but it was out of his hands. I mean, Jan was objectively winning at one stage of the game. So I didn't feel like that in the last game of this match. Um, I mean, Ding didn't play. He wasn't like aiming for a draw from the first moves, but he didn't play something crazy. Like, okay, to me, something crazy would be like, let's say you play knight f3, d5, g3, c5, bishop g2, knight c6, and you don't play d4, right? You play castle and you allow e5 and you play a reverse King's Indian, which is playable. I mean, it could turn into a huge fight, but you're suddenly like just throwing caution to the winds. That's more something you would do in a must-win situation, just to give a kind of basic example. Or with the black pieces, in a must-win game, you might consider, for example, to play the rouser with black. But in a game where the match is tied, you probably won't want to play the rouser. It would probably be considered a bit too risky. And most people, I think, would agree that they probably wouldn't be playing the rouser in game 14 if the match is tied with the black pieces. Just to give some examples of like what would be risky opening choices, what wouldn't be. Now, in terms of how the game proceeded, so I think the opening was interesting. Gukesh came up with a new idea. I'm like reasonably sure that this idea was devised during the match. I mean, maybe they had it in the bag before the match, but I would guess that it was devised during the match um after Gukesh lost this game. The which game was it? It must have
12.
been game 12, right? Yeah,
Game
game
12, yeah.
12. They drew
Yep.
13, and um, where basically Ding at some point was playing knight f3 g3, right? So if someone plays knight f3 d5 g3, then the most direct approach for black is how Gukesh played. You play c5, bishop g2, knight c6, and then you give the choice to white. You can either play d4 or you can play, as I said, some kind of reverse King's Indian, which people don't really do because the computer generally does not approve that. So they play d4. This is like the critical approach. And then e6 castle. And like, for example, if you play knight f6 here, you basically force a transposition to Catalan, but a specific variation of the Catalan, c5 variation. So Gukesh came up with this line, cd4, knight d4, knight e7, which is, I checked it a bit, it's more or less completely new. It's not like a novelty, but it hasn't really been played by any strong players. Engines approve of it. It leads to equality objectively. So that's probably why he went for it. Now, he did at some point, like I don't consider this a risky choice from Gukesh at all. I think it was just basically he found something that was rare, or perhaps one of his seconds found and recommended to him, which was rare, which objectively leads to equality, which is perhaps not the most, let's say, like if theory develops here, it's perhaps not the most clinical way to reach equality with black, but it's if it's new, then you might be attracted to it. And I think Ding played extremely logically all his moves. I mean, everything up until like knight c3 castle and knight b5, everything here was played well from both sides. Ding was on his own. Gukesh probably knew something about the position, and the engine, both the weak one or strong one, will show that after knight b5, black should be playing e5, and it is more or less equal. I mean, if white takes on d4, you take with the pawn, and black maintains this passed pawn on d4, which is not too weak. White has the bishop pair, but black has fine pieces and no real worries. But Gukesh played bishop b6, which gave Ding some chance to play for an advantage. For example, queen to e2 would have led to some sort of decent pressure for white. I mean, it's not a huge advantage, but it's decent pressure. Like you're playing basically a risk-free position where if your opponent plays a bit inaccurately, perhaps white can start to play for a win. But he played b3, and after that, his advantage kind of disappears again. And so then they both played well. Every move basically, like Gukesh was playing extremely well. I don't think that his moves were shocking by any means. I mean, bishop e6, 95 b5 is a good move, but they're all good moves. So you can only give him credit, even though they're perhaps not the most unusual or difficult moves. cb5, I mean, I think basically after b5, Ding decided that he just wants to end the game. This is my feeling. Like you could make a move here, rook e1, rook c1, whatever, and it is about equal, but the tension remains in the position. His next sequence of moves, to me, signals that he's basically saying, okay, let's just end the game concretely, simplify everything, and prepare for tiebreaks. Which is an approach. I'm not being critical. Just this is my impression of why he went for it.
He played this move a4 at some point, and it did feel like at that point, as you just mentioned, he was just looking forward towards tiebreaks. Do you feel like he saw any risks in this approach? Because obviously you can just go queen to d4, follow it up with bishop to g4, try to exchange the bishops and make a draw quickly like that. When you play a4, you do risk losing that pawn on b3 for nothing, like it happened in the game, and then you have to, defend a pawn down position in which most likely is going to be equal no matter what because of the limited material. But do you feel like he understood the risks, or he was still pretty much relaxed at that point?
So I think a lot of people were very critical of a4. I think I'll be like moderately critical of it. It's definitely a bad decision. It was like the first step towards him losing the game. While the previous moves basically, besides the small chance he had, status quo was not changed, right? It was, equal opening. He got a slight chance, but basically everything remained about equal, and white was never in risk. And then after b4, of course, he already showed that he's happy with the draw. And in general, during this match, Ding was in equal positions, not really trying to press. I mean, Gukesh was the one trying to press, even sometimes in worse positions. But Ding was usually, if it's equal, then he's happy to have to a draw. Now, a4 feels like a bit of a nervous way of doing it, because a4 is basically saying, yes, I'm going towards a draw, but I'm accepting that I'll be on the worst side of it, because I have a weakness and you don't have a weakness. So yeah, there's a good chance that this weakness will fall, and probably a lot of pieces will get traded in the process. And yeah, we might get 3 against 2. Rook endgame, it might just be a dead draw. But still, I'm accepting that I'm on the back foot. While if you play, for example, a move like rook to d4, and you follow up with rook d1, queen d2, and yeah, if you want to trade bishops at some moment with bishop d5, black is kind of tied to the weakness of b4, and a2 is not so easy to attack. Actually, it's really difficult to attack because you don't have control of the a8 square, and you can't really pile pieces on that pawn. So although black has nothing to worry about, I don't really see why black is even symbolically better. Basically, I just see it as you can play rook d4, rook d1, and probably black's best thing is to just start trading a bunch of rooks. And then after the trade of even more pieces,
Exactly.
again, we have the weakness of b4, the weakness of a2,
Yeah.
and we will perhaps trade those pawns at some point, but already so many pieces are coming off the board that, a draw is just like almost guaranteed. And not only that, it's not like black is on the better side of it. It's just equal. And besides rook d4, you can do that in a variety of ways. Queen d4, as you mentioned, is probably a completely fine way of doing it. Bishop d5, if you want to try to trade the bishops off immediately and just like lead to even more drawish position. Obviously, without bishops, it's more drawish. But I like rook d4. I mean, the only thing that I would be kind of concerned with white is a rook on c3 a bit of a concern for me. But I think that you can figure out that the rook on c3 doesn't do a great deal. You could play like rook d1, rook c3, queen e2. I'm not looking at an engine, I'm just like looking at the position, thinking more or less what my thought process would be. Rook on c3 is not super threatening. And again, b4 is a weakness. So
I
I'm not
think that's the
gonna
most
like
natural. Yeah, rook d4, rook d1, bishop g4, exchange the bishops, and make a draw basically.
sure, yeah. It doesn't feel like white has any reason to even accept a worse position at this point. A4 is like, I'm not going to be super critical because it's not a huge objective mistake, but obviously, you know, you don't lose a position usually in one move, right? It might be an accumulation
I
of small mistakes.
The way I see it, the problem with a4 is that it becomes a bit more difficult to exchange the bishops. If you exchange the bishops, okay, 4 rooks, even if you go 3 versus 2, that's a very easy draw. 2 rooks, 3 versus 2 is extremely, extremely easy. And you will probably exchange the queens along the process when you lose that pawn, the pawn on b3. If you don't manage to exchange the bishops, as it happened during the game, you run the risk of having problems along the way, as we've seen, getting pushed back as he did. Yeah, I guess that's my perspective in terms of why I feel a4 was just such a critical mistake.
Yeah, to me, it's a very nervous move. It's definitely a mistake, not a mistake which changes the valuation in terms of like draw to losing. I mean, it changes it from draw to draw, just less pleasant draw, and
It changes a trend, yeah?
yeah, it changes the trend. And also, in this kind of situation where a loss is a disaster, it's just the end, and a draw is totally fine for either player, it's very comfortable to be in a position where you can only either make a draw or win. And once we got the position, for example, after they traded, like Ding just immediately gave up the pawn, which again, I don't think he had to immediately give it up, but but once you accept the pawn on b3 being a weakness, it is very likely at some point it falls. But he just immediately gave it up, which was a bit and he traded rooks on a8, which was like, again, yeah, you could maybe say it's practical at this point to do it, or perhaps it just makes life a bit too easy for Gukesh. But if I'm in Gukesh's shoes, I really don't mind this. I mean, I had a slightly worse opening, and now I'm playing 3 versus 2 with bishops on the board. Yeah, my chances of winning are probably super low. I mean, during the game, I'm basically thinking this game is a draw, but there is absolutely not a thought in my mind that I'll ever lose, and there's maybe like a small thought that I can play this for a bit. So
I mean,
why
these
do I mind?
moments are extremely psychological. These final game moments in such a tense match are all psychological, and to have that type of edge coming from that opening, as you just mentioned, you've basically maximized whatever you could have gotten out of the middle game. It must just be a dream come true. And you could sense it also from the body language, right? He was playing fast. He wasn't overthinking, because okay, there's nothing to overthink, right? But he was putting that pressure on the clock as well. And it felt like
There's
that.
absolutely nothing you can be critical about from Gukesh's side.
No. He played a really
He's
good
not
game.
like reaching a winning position, but he had no opportunity to reach a winning position. He was slightly worse from the opening, then he equalized, and then he got a slightly better endgame, slightly more pleasant drawn and objectively drawn endgame.
Yeah.
I like saw a lot of this kind of rhetoric that Ding was happy, or part of him subconsciously was happy to lose, to for whatever reason, to let go of the tension that he's been facing, which obviously there's a lot of tension
I did not
from
see that,
playing
but
this game. No, I mean I saw it like by prominent, like at least one prominent grandmaster, and there was some agreement from other strong chess players. Uh, One who just said directly, like basically, I think his subconscious was hinting that he wants to lose. Which, when I look at his playing this game, I don't get that impression. I mean, he's burning time. He's like really accurate, like not accurately, like very kind of methodically trying to trade off all the pieces. It really looks like he's desperate for a draw at some point in this game, like after the opening phase where he, had a tiny edge and then he kind of squandered it a bit. then he was just trying to trade off all the pieces and also burning time in the process. This doesn't feel like, someone who doesn't care about losing. It's just, okay, I'm throwing caution to winds. I'll play whatever random. Like you see sometimes Parham playing, Parham Muxudlu. This is obviously not meant as a criticism. It's more like, yeah, he's a very exciting player. Like, sometimes he makes some extremely like responsible decisions. Just I won't say carelessly, but just kind of throwing caution to the winds, and that's his style. But he makes like very risky decisions quickly. Sometimes it can also work out very well. You wouldn't say, and I'm obviously not suggesting that he like tries to lose or anything. It's just that that's his style. He plays very very risky chess. But someone who plays risky chess is someone who like plays really quickly and sometimes makes careless decisions. Sometimes they're very good decisions. It's a bit of that. Not someone who's taking a lot of time and trying to trade off all the pieces. That's someone who really wants to draw the game. In my view of it, at least. Anyway, so they have this end game, and then like the next, I don't know how many moves, probably like 20 moves we can basically just skip over, because
Yeah, there's
because
nothing. There's nothing there.
it's not very
Basically,
eventful,
just
right?
shuffling, not shuffling back and forth. Gukesh
But
maximizing
Dukesh
his
pushes his
position,
pawn.
but being still very much safe, right? And with the pawn
Yeah,
on g3, the pawns on f5 and g4, there's very, very few ways in which you can lose that position. And one of the ways in which you can lose was exactly how it happened in the game. Getting the
yeah. I mean,
bishop on
Gukesh
a.
pushed all his pawn,
Yes, go ahead.
and yeah, and then they got this position where basically, Black is shuffling a bit because there are no really concrete ideas. Then Gukesh makes what ends up being a very consequential move on move 52. I don't know if he meant for it to be consequential or if he just played a move which attacked a piece. He played rook b2, he attacked the bishop. The bishop can, for example, go to g2. Absolutely nothing wrong with that. Um, and the point is that if Black ever attacks the pawn on b3, on g3 with like rook b3, you play king f2, and you just keep that pawn defended, and then you keep kind of waiting around with white. I mean, you can't do anything with white, and with Black, since you have no useful pawn breaks, you have to at some point attack the g3 pawn, or force white's king into a really bad position. I don't think that there's any way conceivably to do this. But okay, Ding played bishop a8. Obviously, it's not a bad move, but it ends up, it's like, in a movie, uh, you see like a character cough, and then 20 minutes later they have cancer or something, right? It's like this, it's a move that you may not make much of it, bishop a8, but it ends up being the downfall. Although it's not a mistake. So after king f6, he played rook f4, king e5. And yeah, this is now so this is where Ding makes basically the final move of the world championship. This is the only really crucial move in the game. Uh, I mean, everything else in the game were like small mistakes you can be critical of, but if he had not played this move here, if he had played, for example, bishop to g2, which I think to me is, again, I'm just saying bishop g2, it's just seems like a good square for the
Bishop
bishop.
c6, for example.
I don't want it
Bishop
to be attacked.
h1, I think, even works.
No, bishop. I don't want to allow like rook b1. Oh yeah, it works.
Rook
I mean,
b1, king h2, right? I mean, I don't think
I just don't want to
that's.
put my king on h2. I mean, I don't know, because the thing is, like with the king on h2, I'm worried that at some point black brings a bishop to e4, and then after white takes and rook g4, then e3, the pawn is basically just promoting. I want my king really close to the pawn if that ever happens.
Makes
I
sense.
actually think bishop h1 is like super risky. I don't know if I would. Bishop g2. Then if rook b1, I can play king f2, and then I just wait. And the thing is, like, black's only idea that I could think of was to play bishop b3, c2, e4, or somehow get the bishop to e4 in whatever manner you want. But then white takes on g4, and then black brings a king in at some point. Like maybe white's king is on g1 cut off. Black plays king d4, and then white plays rook g8, and then rook a8, and gets this like long side defense. This is a typical defense in a rook endgame, right? And if e3 king f1, the king just like naturally can come over to defend the pawn. Otherwise, you
Yes.
give checks. For example, king e3, you give check on a3. King e2, you play king g2, and or you don't even have to play king g2, or you just start pushing your g pawn perhaps. But it's basically just a draw with the long side defense. And instead, Ding played a move trying to trade rooks. It's on its surface, it's fine to trade rooks. Like If White's bishop had been anywhere else on the board, for example, g2, not h1 again, but for example, g2, for example, c6, for example, e8, the trade of rooks would not be an issue because it's, essentially it's a good trade for White. It takes out the chance that even theoretical chance you lose, because then Black's only break is f4, and this leads to completely, like, there's no more pieces on the board.
As
So
long as the
trading,
bishops stay on the board.
yeah, that's kind of the issue with the bishop on a8. That's why I mentioned that the bishop on a8 was the first sign that something was wrong. And people were critical of a4 in the game, but a4 would have been completely forgotten if Ding had played bishop g2 confidently and made a draw 25 moves later.
What's your explanation for rook f2? I mean, obviously it's a blind spot. It's a blunder, a cold shower that you sort of realize immediately after, and you could see it on his face as soon as he played rook to f2 and Gukesh started showing through his mannerisms that he sees something. You could see Ding realize what he has done. What's your explanation for rook f2?
I think Ding realized once he let go of the rook, basically. I don't even know if Gukesh's expressions, which definitely gave it away. Like, Gukesh realized basically immediately, and I think the reason Gukesh realized so quickly is probably because he was trying to get this. I mean, he was maybe thinking about playing rook b1, and then
it's
if
one
White
of the
plays
few
rook,
ways in which you can win. Yes.
yeah, basically it's probably
ways.
something that was on his mind for a while. Like, he wasn't expecting to get it, but he was maybe thinking, okay, I'll play rook b1, and yeah, White can play king f2. That's probably just a draw. White can play king g2. Maybe king h2 is what I want because the king gets a little bit farther away from the action. Or if White plays rook f1, then I win. Of course, it'll never happen, but yeah, it's just one of those things that you look at during the game. So as soon as he played rook f2, probably Gukesh had already seen before this move was played that it was bad. Now, Ding probably realized basically immediately, because from my experience, whenever you make an absolutely awful blunder, which happens to everyone, you just realize immediately. It's just like instantaneous. It's one of those things. I don't know what it is, but it's like, couldn't my brain have told me a second earlier that this was going to lose me the game? But yeah, they both realized instantly. It's not difficult. It's not a difficult position to draw. It's not a difficult position to figure out rook f2 is losing. It's basically just Ding was super tired because he just was, because it's a long match. And he had a moment of loss of concentration. And also, if you're very nervous, which he probably was, because again, it is a tough match, then you can tend to lose tension a bit, because maybe your body is just like a bit too tense and just wants to relax for a second. The issue is that relaxing for a second can sometimes lead to this, right? Now, it was a bit unlucky in the sense that you can also relax and just play bishop g2. But yeah, that's just how it goes, it's in some sense unlucky, but also in some sense it's deserved, because yeah, I mean, you have a drawn position. It is a kind of trivial task. So if you lose in one move in this position, like, it's the same as if you played bishop b7. It's a very basic mistake, and we can understand why it would happen, just because like you just like had a kind of 5-second mental collapse. It happens to everyone. But on the other hand, if it happens, then you probably deserve to lose too. It's just how these things work out. It's not an indictment on someone's chest. Just, the margins are kind of fine. So any mistake at this point in the match is the last one. Um, I was kind of disappointed, just because I wanted to see a tiebreak. I thought it would be fun.
Yeah,
So
yeah. I think
see
it
it
would
end
have
in
been
this
fun
way.
also.
Like, to me, it was very logical that Gukesh won the match in general. I mean, I accept it as the most logical result, because he's had better results over the past year by an enormous margin. So that just feels like he's playing the better chess in general. But for it to end with a crude blunder is a bit unsatisfying. Just you want to see kind of like the last match, Ding and Jan. They made a million mistakes, but the finish was extremely extremely climactic. You couldn't have hoped for more. Just like a full-fledged going down to the wire last seconds game, instead of the game kind of ends unceremoniously with rook to f2. But that's what happened.